Good morning. Welcome to day 3 of Stanford Neurodiversity Summit. Thank you for those of you that have participated in the past 2 years, and you have all contributed to exchanging great ideas and started good discussions. We really welcome your feedback, so please turn in your feedback form. Each day has its own feedback form. Today we have a very full schedule as well. First, we are going to start with Dr. Michael Wehmeyer, who will give the keynote presentation on self-determination. And then we are going to have a session on small businesses, big impact. After that, we'll have the second keynote presentation of the day with Dr. Sarah Rankin. And then we'll take a break, and some of you have signed up for networking sessions. Please pay attention to your emails in case there are some changes in the login information and so forth. In the afternoon, we're going to also have a distinguished employer panel. And after that, we'll have the last session of the day. The title is Leveraging Strengths and Opening Doors in K-12, How Working Together Makes a Difference. So for those of you that haven't joined just yet, just want to let you know that all the sessions are going to be recorded and transcribed. Please check our Summit website for YouTube videos of the previous days of the conference. They are already available. For those of you that have just registered today, you won't receive your Zoom webinar links just yet, so please utilize our YouTube live stream on our website. All questions from the audience will be submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The moderators will try to cover as many questions as possible. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Wehmeyer. Dr. Wehmeyer is really one of my idols in many ways. To me, he is the father of self-determination. Dr. Wehmeyer is Ross and Mariana Beach Distinguished Professor of Special Education, Chair of the Department of Special Education, and Director and Senior Scientist of Beach Center on Disability in University of Kansas. Dr. Wehmeyer's research and scholarly work has focused issues pertaining to self-determination, positive psychology and disability, transition to adulthood, the education and inclusion of students with extensive support needs, and technology use of people with cognitive disabilities. He has published more than 450 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters. He is an author or editor on 42 texts, soon to be 43 next year in May. We are going to have a book together that would highlight self-determination and the and also this strength-based model of neurodiversity. Dr. Wehmeyer is past president and a fellow of the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, a fellow of the American Psychological Association. He has been recognized for his research and service with Lifetime Achievement Awards from numerous associations and organizations, including the American Psychological Association, American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, Council for Exceptional Children, and the ARC of the United States. Dr. Wehmeyer's keynote presentation is titled Self-Determination, Strengths-Based Supports, and the Dignity of Work for All. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wehmeyer.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to virtually share some of my thoughts about these issues of self-determination and the dignity of work, and really looking forward to what is work like in the future, and the centrality of issues of self-determination and autonomy and choice for all people for that. So my thanks to Dr. Fung and to all of the support staff who have provided the opportunity and to reach this distinguished and broad audience. So I'm going to share my screen here and get everything set up. Um, and let me get the subtitles turned on. And I think we're go. So what I want to talk about is our work in self-determination, but really broadly, the role of these issues of self-determination and strengths-based approaches to achieving what I think ultimately are our goals in enabling people across the spectrum, people with and without disability, really, to live full, rich lives and lives that are marked by dignity and respect. And I begin with a quote on this from one of the people with autism here in my region. It's a sort of an overcast day here in Kansas. It's clearly turning cold, and the leaves have been falling. And Jean-Paul Bovee is a man, a self-advocate from Missouri, the state over, who has been very influential. And he was asked to talk about issues related to self-determination and self-advocacy, and he made a statement that I think easily summarizes what we really want to achieve, and that is that people with autism and people on the spectrum should be treated with the same dignity, respect, and equality as people without autism. And so, as an objective, as a goal, that is closely aligned with what we see in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Article 3, which is the general principle, states that the overarching general principle is respect for inherent dignity, individual autonomy, including the freedom to make one's own choices and independence of persons. That is the governing overarching principle of the convention. And, it echoes what Jean-Paul Bovee talked about in terms of dignity, respect, and autonomy. But those of us who work in support roles, or people who are in self-advocacy roles, families, whatever your role, I think we become accustomed to language like that without really thinking about what it means. And I just want to point out that when the CRPD talks about inherent dignity, inherent is something that exists within a person, or something that is a permanent and an inseparable quality of a person. And dignity refers to the state of being worthy or honorable, an elevation of character, of worth, of value. So when we proclaim and we claim the notion, the principle of inherent dignity, we're claiming that people, like all people on the spectrum, are worthy of respect, of dignity, are inherently valuable, simply by virtue of their status as a person. Um, I know that you've probably learned a lot about work and work-related issues, and what I want to emphasize is something that Pope Francis brought up, and that is the fundamental dignity of work. One of the reasons that people want to work is because there is a dignity, there is a value. One sees oneself as a valued person, as being able to contribute to the efforts of society, of the community. So work has many, many roles, but I think that one of the importance of work is that it communicates that people have value, that people have worth. I've worked most of my life with people with extensive support needs, and just and I can clearly remember in the 80s when this movement toward meaningful work and supported employment and multiple ways of getting people decent work, simply the presence of people with more extensive support needs in workplaces changed the dynamics. So work is critical for a number of reasons, but certainly one of those reasons relates to the dignity and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So shifting from the CRPD to another UN Declaration of Human Rights talks about inclusion in work as a basic human right. Article 23 says everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. And it's these issues of choice that I think, among the things that you've seen in some of this language, that I think it's important that we grasp onto. And I'll talk a little bit more later on about roles of autonomy and choice in 21st century and beyond work. But that, the right to work is fundamental if people are to participate in the cultural, the societal, the political, all aspects of life in the community. One of the primary barriers to work has not, in my mind, had anything to do with the person or people themselves. It has to do with how society has structured uh, uh, how society has structured itself, how a disability itself, it has been understood. And I know that I don't have to tell most of you these things, but I think it's worth reiterating. We come at disability historically, and I've done quite a bit of work. I realized um, early on, if you will, that in order to really understand the importance of self-determination for people who were marginalized and left out of the mainstream, I needed to understand how historically uh, uh, disability was understood. And the earliest, mid 1800s through the mid 1900s, really, disability was an extension of the medical model, and it was an interiorized state. It was an individual pathology. Um, and when we understand disability as a problem within the person, as this historic way of understanding disability, as we understand um, uh, in that way, the person is perceived as being broken and diseased and pathological and atypical and aberrant, and it becomes inevitable that people are treated as something less than uh, fully uh, participants in society, as fully um, really human in many ways. And, in my work, I've kind of come to what I think are five overarching things we should have learned from these historic understandings of disability. And the first is that if we understand people as different, it really inevitably becomes construed as inferior, as leading to discrimination and maltreatment. We just have so many examples of that, even up to more recent years. If you haven't read the book "The Boys in the Bunkhouse" by Dan Barry, it was published maybe, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago. It's about men with intellectual disability who were taken from institutions in Texas and other places and forced to live in servitude, essentially, in and work in an eviscerating a turkey eviscerating plant. So the way these really sort of astounding ways that people have been treated, that's not ancient history. It exists today, and it exists today because we still too often think about disability as a problem within the person. um, the second thing I think I've learned is what, again, we should have learned a long time ago. Separate is never equal. When we segregate people, when we separate people, we tell them that we think they're different, and of course that means we think they're inferior. And it leads to discrimination and maltreatment. One of the messages I think we have to get from this history is that, I often tell people I've worked in the field really now for 5 decades, beginning with as a special educator in the early in the 70s and 80s. And I know, I've looked at the literature, and the only universal truth from decade to decade to decade is that people with disability have achieved more than the previous decades literature and beliefs thought that they would. We are constrained by our own lack of imagination as to how we can enable and support people to live full, rich lives in the community. So much of what we need to do, both at a individual level, but particularly as a societal level, is to remove the barriers that and to remove the low expectations that come with these historic ways of thinking about disability. And to that end, I think that, I mentioned this. I think one of the conclusions we can come to, if you're looking across the history, is we've always been wrong about what people with disability can achieve. And we're probably wrong now. We need to understand that our biases, our stereotypes, our expectations influence what we do to support, and often get in the way. And I believe fundamentally that the primary injustice committed against people with disability throughout time has been to deny them the dignity afforded to persons simply by their status as human beings. That has happened time and time again, and that is what we need to address, to focus on, and to work with, in concert with people with disability, people on the spectrum. Um, Again, quoting from Jean-Paul Bovee, he talks about the importance of the disability rights movement. And I think, as I'll talk about in a moment, it has been the disability rights movement that has pulled us out of our limited way of thinking and doing things. He talks about the importance of people first in this case, But again, he uses terms around fighting for humanity, for rights, for respect, and for dignity. I've had through the course of my career the distinct privilege of getting to know and to work with some of the pioneering self-advocates both people who have personal experience with disability and people uh, who have who have been there to support them. And it has been the relentless, I think, since really the independent living movement, since a picture there of Bent Nurje. Bent Nurje was a Swedish philosopher um, who introduced the idea of the normalization movement, the idea in the 1960s that people who were marginalized, people with intellectual disabilities who he was working with, had the rights to live, normalized lives. I had the privilege to meet Professor Nurje a number of years ago, and not uh, just circumstantially, he authored the first call for self-determination in a book, call in a chapter in a book that introduced the normalization principle to North America. He authored a book in 1972 called The Right to Self-Determination. It took the field about 20 years, and it took people like Ed Roberts, and it took events like the signing of the ADA, and people like Bob Williams and Ari Neiman and Tia Nellis and Liz Weintraub and Nancy Ward and so many people who have made strides. It took in that 20 years or so between Nurje's first call, it took those people working to create a context and a culture in which we could begin to recognize and support uh, this these issues of self-determination. I'm going to talk in a minute about social ecological models of disability, but I want to acknowledge and recognize the importance of the disability identity movement, the work of people like Paul Longmore and others who have made the very clear and obviously on target point that the disability experience has been an experience of cultural devaluation and socially imposed restriction. And in a way, in a seminal book that he was a co-author on, co-editor on, he defines the disability experience as a struggle for self-definition and self-determination. So again, when we talk about these issues of self-determination, we talk about identity and the what people with disability and people who are marginalized understand as critical for them to overcome the barriers and to work to remove those kinds of barriers. ASAN's position statement says the same kinds of things. The social model of disability, which of course focuses a lot on identity development, um, talks about the recognition of civil rights and dignity of people who are neurodiverse and of creating a world in which people can benefit from supports, from services, from tools, from the kinds of supports that enable all of us to live, learn, work, and play, and to fully participate. This issue of full participation is critical in achieving the kinds of outcomes we want, and again, as associated with respect and with self-determination as the guiding principle. In my work, I've worked as in multiple roles, but primarily in a role of educator. Uh, the social ecological model, or the person environment fit models of disability that were begun in the 1970s and 1980s as the medical field understood that viewing disability, particularly in other long-term healthcare uh, issues within a pathology lens, had very limited utility. So it was the field of medicine that began, issuing and through the World Health Organizations, of course, the International Classification of Impairments, Disabilities, and Handicaps, and then in 2001, the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health. And of course, as I know so many of you know, um, what the ICF particularly did was that it recognized that the experience of disability is not simply rooted in impairments to body structure and function, but it's all about the interactions between one's health and impairments, if you will, health conditions, but environmental factors and personal factors. And it's really all about how all of those impact activities and then full participation. And that, in the same way that Professor Longmore talks about disability and identity as a search for self-determination, I think the ICF particularly situates this in participation. And I think that in many ways, the best way to understand participation is as self-determined involvement in one's life. All of us have different routines. We have different things that we like. Some of us are more solitary, like to sit and read in the evening. Some of us like to go out and be very social and be with people. It's not a matter, participation is not a matter of some quantification of how much you're doing. It's, are you doing what you want to be doing? Are you living a self-determined life in all roles? The ICF uses the notion of a pattern of life, and that's roles, life situations, and activities, all the things that comprise one's identity, really. And work is a really important part of that as an identity. And as a way to fulfill these full participation and inclusion. So, I think the movement toward identity, disabilities identity, the World Health, these social ecological models, they revolve around these issues of self-determination, full participation. There are a number of implications. I had the privilege of editing the Oxford Handbook of Positive Psychology and Disability 7-8 years ago now. And on the positive side, I couldn't have done that 10 years before that. We didn't have a language to talk about strengths and positive aspects of disability, but that has emerged over the last really 2 decades. And again, driven by the self-advocacy movement, driven by the visibility of leaders in the who had personal experience with disability, and driven by more of a focus on positive elements for all people. And there are huge implications. One such implication is that these are strengths-based approaches. We begin with what people do well. We begin with what they like. What are they interested in? What do they value? That's where we start in terms of supporting and enabling people to live full, rich lives. Disability becomes part of and not apart from human functioning, typical human functioning. It is just one of the myriad of ways in which humanness is expressed, right? These approaches focus on the environment more than changing the person. As an educator, my role is, in fact, to teach and to enable young people to learn things and gain knowledge. But we focus on what on not only enhancing personal capacity, but changing and adapting and the demands of the environment. There's a focus on full participation. The assumption is that every person can live, learn, work, and play in their community. They be fully valued, participating members of society. And it emphasizes supports and not programs. And what I mean by that is when we take a disability as pathology lens, we tend to create programs that are based upon those pathologies. So we have a classroom for a kid with this kind of disability. We have a workplace for the person with this kind of disability. What we want to move to is a paradigm in which supports are provided to everyone, the supports they need to live the life that they want to lead. And I honestly think that we know how to do that. At this point, I think it's a matter of will and focus and a willingness to do so. I've talked a lot about supports. I've been involved in efforts to try to, there's an old adage, you measure what you value and you value what you measure. And so we've been looking at ways to begin to measure and to understand what we mean by supports. And basically, I'm going to default. I mean, supports are anything that promote the interest and causes of people with or without disability, enable them to access opportunities, relationships within integrated work, school, living environments, and that result in greater interdependence, productivity, inclusion, life satisfaction, human functioning. In other words, I'm going to argue that supports are anything that enable a person to live a self-determined life, to live the life that they want to live. There are lots of implications of these shifts in towards strengths-based approaches. Among them are the focus is on community inclusion. There's a focus on empowerment. There's full citizenship and participation, and a critical focus on self-determination. So let me shift a little bit to self-determination and autonomy, and then I want to wrap up talking a little bit about the world of work and where we're headed. Just like work, inclusion in work is a basic human right, the Universal Declaration of Rights fundamentally talks about self-determination as a basic human right. Using words that are more common in these kinds of declaration, rights and freedoms. The Declaration talks about people being entitled to rights and freedoms. But it defines these by the range of effective choices open to an actor, to a person. Freedom is about the opportunity to make choices in one's life. Bob Williams talks about this when he talks about self-determination. He said in a quote I use a lot that self-determination is about opportunity, dignity, choice. It's about the opportunity to live the American dream. It's fundamentally about the opportunity to make choices and to live a self-determined life. We're familiar with this term self-determination. I want to go a little bit more into depth with that because I think there are often misunderstandings. They're both political or national sense of the term. If you just Google self-determination, what you'll get is a whole bunch of thousands and thousands of pages about the rights of nations to autonomy and to self-governance. What we're talking about are the personal sense the right, if you will, the opportunities for one to make or cause things to happen in one's life. But we use the term autonomy pretty widely. We often think of it as doing something independently. But what's really important that we understand that self-determination as autonomy refers to autonomy as volition. And that's in my work, we work with adolescents, and that's where this is coming from, but it's true for all of us. The degree to which people regulate their behavior based upon deeply held values, preferences, and interests. When I talk about autonomy, when I talk about self-determination, I'm wanting to root those actions in what people want to do. What are they valued? What are their preferences? What are their interests? That's what people who are self-determined act based upon these values, preferences, and interests. Now, before going further with that, it's important to acknowledge that within the disability rights movement, self-determination has been used in concert with a sense of the importance of these basic rights to self-governance and to autonomy as independence. So I don't mean to belittle that. When you hear people with disability talking about self-determination, as was pointed out by Ben Nurye, 30, 40 years ago, these issues of self-determination are both a political, a rights-based focus for people with disability, as well as having a personal empowerment-related focus. People, when we talk about self-determination, I think it's important that it's about making things happen in your life. Self-determination comes from the philosophical doctrine of determinism that suggests that all actions are caused in some way, shape, or form. Um, Behavior is governed by these, antecedent or other events. So self-determinism is about making things happen in your own life. It's about causing things to happen in your own lives. That people who are self-determined act in ways that are caused by their preferences, their interests, their values, their goals, and not by someone or something else. So we've talked about self-determination as as volitional action that enables a person to act as the causal agent in their life. Um, and a causal agent is just somebody who makes or causes things to happen in their own life. And all of us do this. I taught students with the most extensive support needs, many of whom had limited traditional communication. But nevertheless, I knew when they were happy, when they were unhappy, whether they liked a task, whether they were hungry. They made things happen in their lives. And if I listened and if I was attentive, I could then act in ways that would support them based upon their own volition, but based upon their own action. And this notion of volitional action, it's just not doing what, people think of volition perhaps as being sort of hedonistic. You go out and you do what you want to do, but it's really about it's acting based upon conscious choice. So we act volitionally based upon not only what we want to do and what's important to us, but we act volitionally in that we're conscious about what we're doing. We act and we do things that enable us to achieve a longer term goals. So volitional action that enables people to make or cause things in their lives. I don't have a lot of time to go through a lot of this, but there's lots of it's not about being in control of your life. None of us have control over life. It's not about just doing something independently. Every one of us have other people and other things do things for us. And it's not just making a choice or just being involved in planning for one's life, but those are important elements. But it's about being at the center of making or causing things to happen in your own life. Now, I want to return for a moment back to these notions of work, because I think work is changing, and not only I think that, great many other people think that. And these issues of self-determination and autonomy and are becoming even more important. The futurist I work with, a man named Young Zhao, who's a leader, an international leader in entrepreneurship and creativity. He wrote a really good book called Reach for Greatness. It talks about how schools can change, and that we can build schools around student ownership and volition and self-determination. But he makes the point in a number of writing that, as more and more things become automated, uh, uh, this idea of there's a set of skills that we all have to be successful in work, that's all changing. And what's happening is that as time goes on, and more things are automated, the full spectrum of human talents is becoming economically valuable. I'll give an example of that in just a minute. We can abandon the notion of average. The notion of average has no real utility for us anymore. We understand that all human beings are differently talented. They have different desires and interests, and it's those things that we need to focus on, that enable people to live successfully. And that, we need to create systems both in schools and other places in which people are enabled to be unique and creative and entrepreneurial, and to take advantage of what they're passionate about. And as adults, we learn things because we care about things, we're passionate about something, we're interested. Learning is tied to passion. What a lot of the people looking at what 21st century work and life, and we've seen at the pandemic that work life is combining, sometimes not in ways that we want. But as we look forward, young people entering the world of work today will occupy not only multiple jobs. I've heard folks talking about the fact, but 5 or more careers. I mean, as educators, we're having to prepare young people for jobs that don't exist right now, that 5, 10 years from now. So we need to enable young people, and all people need to be supported, I think, to be adaptive, to be able to communicate, to solve problems, to be engaged in decisions, all the things that are important in issues of self-determination. In the December 2019, that seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? Issue of Forbes magazine, there was a feature on the highest paid YouTube stars of 20 of that year. And the third highest paid YouTube star was this young woman, Anastasia, who was born in Russia somewhere, and with cerebral palsy. She's a young girl still with cerebral palsy. And her parents, um, when she was young and going to physical therapy and doing those things, began videoing her to post on YouTube, so that her family could see her progress. And as they did that, Anastasia has a very bubbly personality, and in the ways of social media in the 21st century, more and more people began to watch these videos and to subscribe to these videos. And so her parents went to a YouTube channel person, and they created unique channels and a YouTube marketing strategy. And in the year 2019, Anastasia's income was estimated to be $18 million out of 6 YouTube channels, um, and over, I can't even remember, a billion or more subscribers across these things. She's an international star. And who could have predicted that, right? Nobody knew this YouTube phenomenon was going to be a phenomenon 10 years ago. I think that Anastasia's example is that we need to put aside all our presumptions. We need to find out, she's valued because she's of her personality, because of, her. We need to do that for everyone that we support, that we care about, that we engage with. In the field of work and vocational rehabilitation, there is a recognition that the world of work is not what it used to be. You don't enter a career and stay in the same job for 30 or 40 years. There's going to be multiple jobs. And so there's this movement toward what's called a life design approach. And life designing is the idea that fundamentally, we have to construct our own careers, but we also need to be able to construct our own lives. That young people are going to have to learn how to construct and to build their own lives, to identify what they're good at, and to be able to put those into place. So in our work with adolescents, and again, this is not a disability issue as much as it is everyone, we emphasize enabling young people to become experts in constructing their own career paths, and taking on their own transitions, and addressing threats and opportunities, and designing a better life. And that is all about being self-determined. It's about addressing small and large problems in your life. It's about setting goals and creating plans, and engaging in those things. I'm not going to go into any depth at all about it. We have actually worked on a model that enables people with and without disability, but our work has been in the context of disability, to to self-direct, self-regulate problem solving, leading to setting and attaining career-related goals. This involves a person solving problems. What are my career and job goals? What are my plans? What have I achieved? They solve these problems. It enables them to set and achieve goals that are related to career. It's about designing their own lives. We, support people in roles of facilitating, enabling people to identify what they do well, what they're good at, what they need to learn, and that. There's more information on this website if you want. More information about that process. There's a facilitator's guide. There's work out there. I want to close, and we got a few minutes for questions. I had the privilege of speaking, of doing a eulogy for some friends of mine, a colleague, Ann and Rudd Turnbull. Their son Jay worked at the Beach Center. He was a man who had multiple labels, including autism. But he worked at the university. I worked with him. He was a valued member of our community here in Lawrence, Kansas. He died unexpectedly about a decade ago. And I got to thinking about what I would say in this eulogy. I'm used to talking, but that's a high pressure. You want to get it right. And the day before the funeral, the university posted on its website a memorial, an article, and the title of that article was "Long-Term Employee, passes away." And I thought about that, and I thought, in most circumstances, that headline would have read, disabled man, passes away, or disabled son of distinguished professors passes away. But that headline and the story recognized the dignity of the work that Jay had done for 20 years and the value that he brought to the university community through that work. And I realized, and what I said in the eulogy the next day, was that, we're in a lot of different businesses, if you will. We may be rehabilitation, we may be medicine, we may be therapy, we may be, we may be parents, we may be self-advocates. But ultimately, really, what Jay's life taught me and what that headline reminded me is that ultimately we are in the dignity business. And that is what our goal should be, and our objective should be, as the CRPD states, the desire to enhance dignity, respect, autonomy for everyone. And with that, I'm going to close, and I'm happy to take a couple of questions that may be out there.
Thank you so much, Michael, for this presentation. It's so rich in information, and I personally appreciated the historical context and the comment you made about we've always been wrong and we're probably wrong now, which for me kind of inspires me to keep learning and to continue to grow. So thank you for that, as well as for your entire presentation. So we do have a few some questions from the audience. So I will just jump right into those. One question comes, I think, from a parent. She says, I feel that my young adult son was on a great path for independence and a self-determined life. It is my opinion that the pandemic has caused this progress for him and his peers to take a couple of steps backward. Loss of job, isolation, except for Zoom. Can you talk about how you think this pandemic has affected the progress made in community inclusion and specifically work? And how and what can we prepare or plan for once a pandemic has passed to get back on track?
That's a really excellent observation, and I couldn't agree more. I think that this has been, I think, a clarion call for us. There's an old adage. I have worked in transition and tangentially in supporting adolescents and young people to transition to work. And it's the old last hired, first fired outcome. And to some degree, the pandemic is just the latest example of that. There's any time that there's a recession, or any time, in this case, a health crisis. So, I think we have got to we've got to use this as an opportunity to recalibrate. I think business is going to be recalibrating. I was telling the crew before this, I used to travel quite extensively. I'm not sure that's going to happen. People have discovered issues of Zoom and everything else. There are opportunities that are going to be broad. We were moving in these directions in terms of future work. And the pandemic has expedited a lot of things. And unfortunately, what happened in the pandemic is we took our current model and we imposed it upon what the possibilities in terms of work and learning and all sorts of things are. So we need to disentangle. We can't just, my context is schools. And schools have had a tough time, and teachers it's really difficult, and there's no blaming here. I understand it. But, you read stories about kids sitting 8 hours a day in front of a computer. You hear stories about having time out from something. We can't just keep doing the same thing. So I think we have to look at And I think it does go back to that issue of self-determination. What is it that you do well? What do you want to do? We cannot rely on the generosity of employers to ensure that people have meaningful work. That's one of the problems, I think, with supported employment, and it's why self-employment and customized employment are at least nominally better models, because those involve the person and really the emphasizing what people bring to it. And I'm not bashing supported employment here. But one of the reasons, I mean, if you look at 1985, we had about 20% of the workforce funded through the DD system was in supported employment. If you fast forward to 2010, 2012, the latest data I've seen, it's still 20%. We've made zero progress. And that's because our model has relied on the goodwill of systems. And so we've got to shake those systems up. We've got to figure out what it is that we can harness. One of the messages I learned, and it's sort of not as directly related to employment, although of course the primary quote form of employment is still segregated for far too many people, not the questioner's circumstance, but the pandemic pointed out how incrementalism has not worked in our field. We have been making incremental steps toward inclusion, toward meaningful work, toward living in the community. We have set minimal goals, and what that has resulted in was people with disability living in high-risk nursing homes and institutions where they were at much higher risk for disease and for death. We've got to just abandon, I think technology, we've got to embrace technology. We've got to know what, not just, video conferencing. That's just one small element of this. We've got to embrace what technology can do. If I had more time, we would have talked about some of these issues. So, I didn't really answer the question very well. I think we just have to rethink, though. I think we have to use this to recalibrate and think how we can move forward differently and refocus. So.
Thank you. And you're actually, in your answer, are kind of touching on some of the other questions that are coming in. So I'm going to ask one of those to see if you have anything more to sort of add about that, or any specifics. But this question is, how do we direct young people to make realistic career choices that also reflect the needs of the marketplace? Jobs are a match for a person's skills and the needs of employers.
Yeah, I think that's the reality today, but I don't think it's going to be the reality tomorrow. So first of all, I think we have to, I think Anastasia's example was an extreme example of how things are going to change in the future, and that I think I've been involved in, as I said, transition planning, and I think the problem has been that we start with what's out there in terms of jobs, and we try and match people based upon, to some degree, preferences and abilities. We've got to start with the person. What is it they do well? What do they like to do? What can we build on? And then where can we find places that that person's skills, and that's what self-employment was all about. It's what customized employment takes to that next level. So we have the self-determined career design model, but another model called the self-determined learning model of instruction. I gave you that website, self-determination.org. We have worked very hard to enable young people to learn to set goals. And one of the premises of this is that we don't go in and we don't say, oh, that's not a realistic goal for you to set. Young people learn that something is realistic or not by setting goals and trying to attain them and getting the supports. And young people can learn that they're not going to achieve a particular goal, that they may have set. So the process is designed so that as students set goals and create action plans and then monitor their progress, if they're not making progress, they change their action plan. And if that doesn't work, they change their goal. So, I think that we get there by enabling young people to learn through these processes of working through these. And honestly, we've done this. We've worked with thousands and thousands of students, and over the last 5 to 10 years, we've been working in inclusive context. This is something all kids need. And, self-determined learning is something that's important for every kid. So I would say let's begin to shift and let's put students in the center of that so that students learn that what the goals they want are not goals that they can easily attain. But let's shift the paradigm from being what's out there in the community to what it is that students do well. What do they like to do? And let's find out ways that we can create meaningful employment opportunities based upon that.
Thank you. There's so much clearly to discuss when it comes to employment and opportunities and finding them. So thank you. If you are able to stay for just a moment, I've
Sure.
got one last question. We have many questions, but we did have several questions coming in related to language. One being, is it time to get rid of the term disability? And we had several around autistic adults and having sort of ownership over their own identity language. And I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit about the connection of language and the language we use and its connection to self-determination.
Yeah, well, and I'm ready to abandon. I mean, I think we ought to be thinking about what supports do people need to be successful, independent of any factors. I mean, disability as a construct hasn't served a lot of people very well over time. And I think that there are some changes to how it's understood that I've tried to emphasize. But nevertheless, I've been advocating for moving to a sort of a supports-based paradigm. Let's just, we don't need to talk about labels or disability. And, I think that, I think it's, I brought up the issue of identity, disability identity and the importance of the social model. I am really excited to see that becoming a major role, that people are proud of who they are for what they are, and that our world and our societies are so much better when people are just who they are. And so it's always difficult to it happens, I know, at the level of policy. If you become too ambiguous, then the people that need the resources or the policy don't get practice. But I think we're moving in ways that make some of these. I'd love to see federal law redone so that we look at supports and what support needs people have, and we don't worry, and we spend an inordinate amount of money and time diagnosing and doing those things. Now there are value to people themselves and families and having information. I'm not saying that, but so I would endorse these ideas that move away from these kinds of languages and I think self-determination is something that's important for everybody. It's important for people who have personal experience with disability because they don't have equal opportunities to access it. And so we've got to at least be able to point that out. But I think the self-advocacy movement, the neurodiversity movement are the folks that are best to have that voice and to send that message. So the more people who are out there who have personal experience saying this and talking about these things, the better. So
thank you so much. Thank you for all you've presented today, and for having some time to answer some of these questions. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's my privilege and my best to everyone out there. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you, Dr. Wehmeyer. This is really inspirational talk, and there's so much that we are needing to do to really make self-determination really at the center of a lot of our activities in the Neurodiversity at Work initiatives. So with that, we are going to have about 10 minutes break right now, and then we're going to be going to the next session at 9:45. And the next session will be Small Businesses, Big Impact. See you soon.